Acharya Statara Sada Sri Srimad, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitya-lila Pravisaram Vishnupad Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakota Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Seiko Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyamakunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Sri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Sri Mathura Dham Ki Jai. Sri Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mayi Ki Jai. Jamuna Mayi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Sri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Gaura Premananda. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Go Premanandi. Is there some water? Keep it there for me. Thank you. That's all right. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vanchakalpaturvishcham Kripasindhuvimacham Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Gaura Premanandi. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Okay, so we're on Canto 1, Chapter 6, Conversation between Narada and Vyasadeva. And 26, is that on the board? Yeah. Namani Anantasya Hata Trapa Patan Guyani Badrani Kritani Cha Smaran Gam Paryamtams Tushtamana Gataspriyaha Kalam Pratikshan Vimado Vimatsaraha Namanyanantasya Atatrapapatan Guyani Badrani Kritani Chasmaran Gamparyatams Tushtam Anagata Spriha Kalam Pratikshan Vimado Vimatsaraha Namanyatantasya Atatrapapatan Guyani Badrani Kritani Chasmaran Gamparyatams Tushtamanagata Spriya Kalam Pratikshan Vimado Vimatsaraha Namanyatantasya Atatrapapatan Guyani Badrani Kritani Chasmaran Gamparyatams Tushtamanagata Spriya Kalam pratikshan vimado vimatsara. Namanyatantasya tatrapatsudam Guyani Badrani Kritani Chasmaran Gamparyatam Stushta Managata Spriya Kalam Pratikshan Vimado Vimatsara. Ladies. Namanyanantasya tatrapadrajam Guyani Badrani Kritani Chasmaran Gamparyatam Stushta Managata Spriya Kalam Pratikshan Vimado Vimatsara Namanyanantasya tatrapadrajam Guyani Badrani Kritani Chasmaran Gamparyatam Stushta Managata Spriya Kalam Pratikshan Vimado Vivatsaraha Namani, the holy name, fame, etc. Anantasya, of the unlimited. Hatatrapaha, being freed from all formalities of the material world. Patan, by recitation, repeated reading, etc. Guyani, mysterious. Badrani, all benedictory. Kritani, activities. Cha, and. Smaran, constantly remembering. Gam, on the earth. Paryatan, traveling all through. Tushtamanaha, fully satisfied. Gataspriyaha, completely freed from all material desires. Kalam, time. Pratikshan, awaiting. Vimadaha, without being proud. Vimatsaraha, without being envious. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Thus I began chanting the holy name and fame of the Lord by repeated recitation, ignoring all the formalities of the material world. Such chanting and remembering of the transcendental pastimes of the Lord are benedictory. So doing, I travelled all over the earth, fully satisfied, humble, and unenvious. Please repeat. Thus I began chanting the holy name and fame of the Lord. Sorry. By repeated recitation, ignoring all the formalities of the material world. Such chanting and remembering of the transcendental pastimes of the Lord are benedictory. So doing, I traveled all over the earth, fully satisfied, humble, and unenvious. Purport. The life of a sincere devotee of the Lord is thus explained in a nutshell by Narada Muni by his personal example. Such a devotee, after his initiation by the Lord or his bona fide representative, takes very seriously chanting of the glories of the Lord and traveling all over the world so that others may also hear the glories of the Lord. Such devotees have no desire for material gain. They are conducted by one single desire, to go back to Godhead. This awaits them in due course on quitting the material body. Because they have the highest aim of life, going back to Godhead, they are never envious of anyone, nor are they proud of being eligible to go back to Godhead. Their only business is to chant and remember the holy name, fame, and pastimes of the Lord, and, according to personal capacity, to distribute the message for others' welfare without motive of material gain. Thus I began chanting the holy name and fame of the Lord by repeated recitation, ignoring all the formalities of the material world. Such chanting and remembering of the transcendental pastimes of the Lord are benedictory. So doing, I traveled all over the earth, fully satisfied, humble, and unenvious. Okay, so we have a nice description here of pure devotional service, as Prabhupada says, in a nutshell. So Prabhupada also fits this description perfectly. Yeah, we've just I just received a copy of the new book by Giriraj Maharaj, I'll Build You a Temple, which is all about the struggles that Prabhupada endured in getting the Juhu Beach property and then building the temple there. And Prabhupada had made a pact with Krishna, with Radha Rasabihari, that if you just sit tight here and don't move, I'll build you a big temple. So that was his promise. And once having made that promise, then he worked very hard to fulfill it. Actually, there were so many obstacles, ups and downs for years. That fight was going on for about 3-4 years. And so many demons were trying to stop the occupation of the land. The person that sold it to Prabhupada tried to resell it to somebody else. He died. When he died, Prabhupada clapped his hands. He said, actually, as a devotee, we shouldn't do this, but he was such a demon that I was very glad that he was taken out. So even then, the man's wife, she fought to the bitter end, trying to get more money out of Srila Prabhupada. He had to personally, one time, he was up in Ahmedabad doing programs. The devotees in Juhu, they'd studied the legal aspects of the land, and they came to the conclusion that actually we don't need this land, we should just give it back and get back our deposit. When Prabhupada heard that, then he flew down from Ahmedabad back to Bombay just to stop it. And because we were in 90%, I think, because we were in possession of the land in India, possession is 90% of the law. So Prabhupada knew that legally we had no rights because our devotees, Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Brahmananda and others, maybe not Brahmananda, they had given back the title to the land to Mrs. Nair. Prabhupada had to come, and even though he knew he had no legal right, he stayed there anyway, and then he negotiated very cleverly with Mrs. Nair and several of the personalities that were assisting her. And somehow or another, he got the possession and he got the rights to build on it, and then he, of course, built what he said is the most wonderful temple in India practically. Now hundreds of thousands of people go there to hear the glories of the Lord, the name and fame. So that was all Krishna's mercy. It was all conducted by Srila Prabhupada, but under the auspices of Radha Ras Bihari, and by sticking doggedly to his task, then eventually he got possession and built this wonderful temple. So, of course, not everybody can do that, but the point is that if you're really determined, a pure devotee, once they make a promise to the Lord, they don't forget that. They're always working very hard to fulfill it. When Prabhupada was here in Mayapur in 1976, one of his godbrothers came to see him, B.R. Sri Dham Maharaj, and he complimented him that this prediction of Lord Chaitanya, Prativichaya Chajato Nagaradi Gram Sabacha Prachahoy Bay Moranam, so that prediction, he said, I can see now, has been fulfilled by you after 500 years. He said that initially they were thinking, or at least some of the devotees in the Gaudiya Mat were thinking, that this is just some kind of poetic eulogy, some praise of the holy name, saying, oh, it will go all around the world. But he said, we never really believed it. We thought it was just some, nice poetic expression. But he said, now you've shown us that actually the holy name has gone all around the world, to every town and village, and will continue to do so. So therefore, he said, you are the real Acharya, which was quite a compliment from Sri Dham Maharaj, that he recognized that Prabhupada was the actual Acharya, because previously, in the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, just after his departure, then the leaders of the Gaudiya Mat began to argue and fight amongst themselves. So Sri Dham Maharaj and Prabhupada said two other gentlemen, this was from a letter from 1974, he said Sri Dham Maharaj was guilty or responsible, he and two other gentlemen, for trying to install a single Acharya, whereas Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had never mentioned that there should be a single Acharya. But they took it upon themselves to anoint someone and push him forward as being the, successor Acharya. And then just after that, I don't know exactly when, but not long after that, then that person that they were putting forward as an Acharya, as the Acharya, he was discovered to be doing all kinds of nonsense, and he was a fallen person. So then they had to withdraw. So then after that, each sannyasi or each person that had a bit of a following, they set themselves up in their own institutions and declared themselves acharyas. Prabhupada said sometimes some places there were 2 or 3 acharyas within a week. They set somebody up and then they would fall down and then they'd set somebody else up. So for him then in 1975-76 to declare that I think you are the real Acharya, that was a real recognition. Of course they were good friends, but Prabhupada actually fulfilled, it wasn't just talk, he actually fulfilled the desire of Lord Chaitanya by spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. So he was the right person, he was sent at the right time. And what Prabhupada did was miraculous, practically speaking. Nobody could do, I don't think, nobody could do what Prabhupada did. And at a time, now we're getting old. Well, I'm the same age now that Prabhupada was when he began when he left for the West. I can tell you there's no way I could even contemplate doing anything that Prabhupada did from that period, in his late 60s and into his 70s. It's just impossible, almost an impossible thing. But Prabhupada somehow or another did it. He ignored all the difficulties, all the restrictions, all the setbacks, and he had within his mind a vision of what ISKCON is meant to do. He had an idea that he took from his Guru Maharaj. You'll see actually most of the things that we're doing in ISKCON, they were all initiated by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That was part of his plan. He had a well-developed intention and understanding of taking Krishna consciousness all around the world. It's not that just Srila Prabhupada had that idea, but we see that in the 1930s, let's say 1927, there was a magazine that they were putting out called the Gauriya, and there was another one, Sajantoshini. So in 1927, then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he renamed the Sajantoshini as the Harmonist, and he converted it from a Bengali periodical into English. So that was in preparation for the time when they would go out of India and take Krishna consciousness around the world. That was the desire of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, following in the footsteps of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave all the seed ideas, if you like, to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he in turn gave them to his disciples. So that spreading of Krishna consciousness all around the world, it's not that it was a unique thing to Srila Prabhupada. There were other devotees that were instructed to go and spread Krishna consciousness worldwide. We know that 3 devotees, they went there in 1933. Sambhidananda, who was the brother of Bhaktivilas Tirtha, and Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha Maharaj, he went, and Bon Maharaj. So the 3 of them, they were there in London, and if they were able to establish, what do they call that? A forward post? There's a name for it, I forget now. Anyway, they were able to establish a foothold. If they could establish a foothold in England, then from there Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was going to go there himself and then orchestrate the spread of the Krishna consciousness movement all around the world. But somehow or another these men could not do it. Sambhidananda had been trained as a lawyer, actually. I was just told the other day that in 1930 he had gone to London and studied there. He got his PhD in Krishna consciousness. It was printed up, and that dissertation that he did, that was taken by these 3 men in 1933 to England, and they were using that as the basis for their preaching, for meeting scholars and other personalities. But somehow or another, they couldn't attract a proper following. Bhakti Hridaya Bon Maharaj, he was more interested actually in getting a name for himself as a scholar. So he was only dealing with scholars and top politicians. He even went to Germany. He met some of the high-ranking Nazi party leaders at that time, because this is way before the Second World War. So the Nazi party was on the up and up. So he actually met some of the men there and preached to them something about, they asked him mainly, what is your conception in the Bhagavad Gita of the Aryan race? Because they had their idea that the Aryans were German. Anybody who was German and fitted a particular description, then they were considered the Aryan race. Whereas, of course, in Bhagavad Gita it mentions about the Aryans, that they're highly elevated, highly cultured personalities. It's not based on birth or anything like that, but on quality. So anyway, the point is that although they travelled here and there, there's reports that were being issued periodically about what they were doing. Of this, they met Lord Zetland. Lord Zetland was the governor of Bengal at one time. He was happy to meet with them, but when he met with them and he asked them, "Can you make me a Brahmin?" And they said, "No, not possible." Well, they said yes, sorry. They said yes, but you have to follow these standards. No meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling. And Lord Zetland said, "Oh, impossible." So they couldn't convert anybody. They got one place, some old lady had a house in London. I just forget her name now. I think she may have even got initiated. But that was it. So after 2 or 3 years, they were called back. And Bon Maharaj in particular, who was supposed to be the leader of the group, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati understood this man is working for his own name and fame. Yeah, he's a proud man. And that was actually told to me many, many years later. I had gone in the early 90s to Toronto, and I met with one professor there. He was known to Srila Prabhupada. He had come to see him in 1976. He was a very friendly person, good scholar. So I'd gone to see this gentleman, I just forget his name now. Anyway, I went to see him and we were talking, and he told me at one point, he said, "I was thinking about writing a biography of Swami Bon. What do you think about that?" I didn't really want to say anything. I didn't want to say openly what Prabhupada had criticized him for. So I was kind of a bit reluctant, and he saw that. So he said, actually, he said, "I'm not sure," but he said, actually, he was a proud man. So this professor, he was thinking about writing a biography of Swami Bon, but even he said he was a proud man. So that pride prevented him from transmitting Krishna consciousness to other living beings. He was only interested in communicating with people of his own caliber, so-called scholars. He wanted to make a name for himself as a scholar. And we saw that in 1977 when Prabhupada left the planet. We had the Utsav after about 1 week. And Bon Maharaj was the senior most Gaudiya Vaishnava devotee in Vrindavan at that moment. So he was invited to come and give the laudatory speech. So whilst he was talking, he said, he said, like your Guru Maharaj, I went to the West. He said, but I didn't care for all these hippies. He said, I was only preaching to the scholars. Whereas your Guru Maharaj, he was making devotees from all the hippies. So indirectly he was criticizing and proclaiming, I'm a higher class Vaishnava. Your Guru Maharaj, he only preached amongst the low class people and therefore he got a big following. I only preached amongst the scholars, so I don't have many followers. So that kind of pride prevented him from being able to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. But Srila Prabhupada, because he was not proud, it says here, let me just get this, they're not nor are they proud of being eligible to go back to Godhead, nor are they envious of anyone. So Prabhupada had to deal with these kinds of negativities in spreading Krishna consciousness, because he was non-envious and because he was not proud, because he was a very humble devotee, just willing to do whatever Krishna wanted him to do. He had no hope that he would be successful, and in fact he told me that in Bombay in 1976. In December, we were there for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. One day I was chatting with Prabhupada in his room, and he leaned back, he said, actually, I didn't go to the West to become successful. It's an interesting comment. I never went to the West to become successful. So I went there because I was enthusiastic to fulfill the desire of my Guru Maharaj. Whatever my Guru Maharaj had told me, I wanted to do that. So that was Prabhupada's motivation. Not the pleasure of, getting some laudatory comments from others. He was just simply trying to please his spiritual master. And he had this utsahan, he said. That's very important for spreading, for a preacher, to be enthusiastic. Yeah. Whether you're being so-called successful or not, it doesn't matter, but you should maintain your enthusiasm. So that enthusiasm for a devotee, that comes from contact with other devotees and Krishna himself. We see here that it's mentioned that Narada Muni saw the Lord before him. The Lord came specifically to increase his utsahan, his enthusiasm. And after showing himself to Narada Muni, then he disappeared. And that was to further increase his enthusiasm for seeing the Lord. So once he was fixed up like that, he had practical experience. All his senses were engaged in the service of the Lord. Rishikesha, the senses of the Supreme Lord. He is the master of all the senses. And when a devotee engages his senses in the service of the Lord, then he always feels the presence of the Lord within himself, within his heart. Whether he sees him or not is not a consideration. He may see him or he may not see him. Yeah? But he's always aware of the Supreme Lord within his heart, and therefore he becomes fearless in the propagation of Krishna consciousness. Because that's, after all, it's not just, in this period of time that the idea of spreading Krishna consciousness has come about. It's always there. Narada Muni was spreading Krishna consciousness right from the beginning of the universe. Yeah, later it's mentioned that at a certain time, then when Lord Brahma ceases his activities and enters into his period of sleep, and all the personalities enter back into Lord Brahma, then he goes to sleep for 4 billion plus years. And then again, the next day of Brahma, there's a reconstruction. We read about Lord Brahma, giving birth to so many different kinds of living beings. So in that next birth then, Narada Muni, he becomes a direct son of Lord Brahma. In his previous birth, he was the son of a Sudrani, small boy, and his mother was a maidservant. In his next birth, he becomes directly the son of Lord Brahma, and immediately he's preaching. All the big personalities in the universe, Prahlad Maharaj or Dhruva Maharaj or others, they're all initiated by Narada Muni. Yeah, so he's respected amongst all of the great sages that also took birth from Lord Brahma, and let's say the Kumaras, 4 Kumaras. So they're expert in philosophy. But Narada Muni, he's expert in bhakti, and that bhakti yoga, engagement of all the senses and the consciousness in loving exchanges with the Supreme Lord, glorifying the Supreme Lord, that Narada Muni personifies. So everybody respects Narada Muni as being the ultimate devotee. And his business is just simply traveling with this veena. He plays the veena that was given to him by Krishna. That means that the veena is also transcendental. And he goes here and there engaging people in Krishna's service and giving them this vision of going back home, back to Godhead. So that's our fortune also. There's several, just recently somebody told me they've been doing some research on what things, statements Prabhupada had made about Narada Muni. So one time there was a program, I'm not sure whether it was New York or LA or someplace like that, maybe Los Angeles. So the devotees advertised that program, and Prabhupada personally came to attend, to speak, and nobody came. Yeah, no, there was just the devotees and Prabhupada. They'd advertised, but nobody came. So Prabhupada wasn't, the devotee that had organized it was disappointed. But Prabhupada wasn't disappointed. He said, don't you see? He said, Narada Muni came. Lord Brahma came. So Prabhupada saw Narada Muni there at the program. Somebody said that he was laughing. And they asked him, why are you laughing? Prabhupada said, you don't see? Narada Muni's here. So we may see or not see, but Prabhupada was seeing, the future of this movement as, integral to the development of human society in the future. That's what he wants. He was aiming to create or manifest, if you like, a society that would lead people out of the rotten condition of tamagun and rajagun, and at least into sattvagun. Yeah. Urdhvam gachanti sattvasto. To go up, you have to be in the mode of goodness. Yeah. Majje tishtanti rajasa. If you remain in rajas, then majja, you stay on that level, middle level. And ado gachanti tamasaha. Jaganya guna vrittista. If you are in the mode of ignorance, you go to hell. You fall down into the lowest position, become a dog or a hog. You have this human form, but if we don't utilize it to go up, you can't maintain a position, medium position. The modes of nature are vying with each other, their influence is there. Sometimes you feel a little tinge of goodness, sometimes you feel some passion, and sometimes you're not feeling anything. That's the mode of ignorance. Yeah. So Prabhupada's mission was, at least, he said, we want to establish a varnashram society so that people can see how to live their human life in the proper way by understanding how to interact according to the modes of material nature through the varnashram system. It's very structured. So by trying to live according to the standards of the varnashram system, then one becomes a human being. Lord Ram, when he came back from his exile, Bharat met him on the outskirts of Ayodhya and invited him, now you take up your crown again. So Lord Ram, he wouldn't enter Ayodhya unless every single person was practicing the varnashram system. And he said, if there's even one person who's not following the varnashram system, I will not enter Ayodhya. So it's a very important part or aspect of the Krishna consciousness movement that Prabhupada wanted to implement. I've just been going over some material from 1977, the last 6 weeks in Vrindavan. And before that, in earlier part of 1977, Prabhupada mentions or said, Abhiram Prabhu told me this because he was in the room when Prabhupada mentioned it, that I've only done 50% of my work, the other 50% varnashram. I was personally with Prabhupada in early December 76 when he went down to Hyderabad. So we've been given some land in Hyderabad or at least it seems so. Some trust was set up. We had 560 acres of land, and Prabhupada spent 2 weeks there just to give some impetus to the local devotees to establish a kind of, I'm not sure if it's the right word, but rudimentary form of the Varnashram system. And it was very simple. The whole area where the farm is, it's called Medchal. So it's all farming communities, simple villages. And Prabhupada's idea was that he would advertise every evening a Pandal program on our land. There would be some chanting and dancing. There would be some nice first-class prasadam. And then gradually, as people became attracted in the local area, we would try to make them devotees. If they wanted to become devotees, then Prabhupada his plan was to give them 1 acre, 2 acres of land to each householder. And then they would have little groups of houses, maybe 10 or 12, and then in the center of that there'd be a small temple. People would get up, rise up early in the morning, take the bath, have Mangalarati. The deity could be Radha Krishna, could be Lakshmi Narayan, could be Balaji, because in that area, of course, of India, Balaji is very famous. Any Vishnu Tattva. And people, they would come, they would worship the Lord, and then they go out doing their business as farmers. No change of occupation, but just a change of consciousness. So they knew how to do farming, and they go out, work in the fields in the daytime. In the evening they come back, take their bath, again go for arati and chanting. That's it. That was Prabhupada's idea of a Varnashram system. So when we left Vrindavan in early December to go down to Hyderabad to inaugurate this, Prabhupada, as he was getting in the car, he said, now we're going to inaugurate another phase of this movement. And myself and Jagadish Prabhu were in the car, so Prabhupada, he made that comment, and then he didn't say anything more. So we said, well, what is that, Srila Prabhupada? Prabhupada said, Varnashram. So there's lots of other quotes, of course, but Prabhupada wanted to at least bring people up to the mode of goodness, because from that platform then they become receptive to the idea of transcendental life. Mode of goodness is not transcendental. Vishuddhasattva, that's transcendental. So at least though, people have to be in the mode of goodness before they can understand what actually is Vishuddhasattva, what is transcendental living. So in that way then Prabhupada, he had a very broad idea, far-reaching plan for spreading Krishna consciousness. This is, what we're doing in ISKCON is like a, what they call it, the forerunner, if you like. Prabhupada told us, again, here in Mayapur in 77, that we should have a Varnashram system in ISKCON. Because otherwise people won't know what it is. We have to practice it, and people will see us practicing it, then they'll become interested. We have to show an example. So in that way then, Krishna consciousness will spread and spread. And we've already seen in the last 20, 30 years that Krishna consciousness now has become totally transformed from what it was in the early days when Prabhupada was here. Prabhupada told us that I've given the basics, now it's up to you to expand on that principle. So we have a lot of work to do, and the way to do it, of course, is to follow the example of the acharyas. We take instruction from them. Narada Muni, he's also in our disciplic line. And gradually, that which is presently unseen to us, will manifest. There are so many different aspects. We don't see everything that's going on. We're quite limited in our sensory perception. But there are great things awaiting this movement. In 77, on the train from Allahabad to Calcutta, Prabhupada told myself and Rameshwar, he said that history will mark this period when the Krishna consciousness movement saved the world. So we shouldn't think that what we've got right now is all there's going to be. Of course, we've expanded beyond what we could have imagined in the 1970s. Yeah. But what it will be in another 50 years' time, let's see. Prabhupada had plans, and he gave the essence of the knowledge of how to, rule a country, on what standard the citizens should work and how they should work. That's all there in Prabhupada's purports, but there's lots of stuff in Prabhupada's books that we have yet to manifest. Yeah. So we should expect that in the future there's going to be other bigger transformations. And of course, as you develop according to the direction of the Shastra, Guru, then it must be successful if one is devoid of pride and pride and enviousness. If we have any envy in our heart towards any other living being, that will prevent us from going back home, back to Godhead. Yeah, Krishna consciousness movement is Vishuddha, where it's pure and transcendental. But if we introduce or we express pride or any of these other mode of ignorance kind of manifestations in the heart, then it will not be successful. So we have to work hard to purify ourselves. As Narada Muni, he had to spend one lifetime traveling all over the surface of the globe, always chanting, always glorifying the Supreme Lord. If one can do that, then at the end, the same result will be there. That one will go back home, back to Godhead. But we have to be very pure of heart to bring that about. Okay, so we'll stop there. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, usually we don't hear someone saying that I'm very humble. But Narada Muni is saying, yeah, I've travelled, I was very humble. So it appears that, it's a realization they have. It is something that is pure. So if you're on that platform, you can say that I'm very humble. I'm very humble.
I'm sorry, I didn't pick that up.
Usually we say we don't like to advertise that I'm very humble. I'm very humble.
You want to lower your mask?
Yes.
Might be, yeah. Say it again, sorry.
So we usually don't say that I am very humble.
We don't say that.
Well, we do that. I'm your humble servant there. But I say that I am humble. But it appears that it's a realization on the pure platform, then it's just a natural thing. You are humble.
Yes. There was a conversation we had with Prabhupada in Delhi in 1976. That point was brought up, that a devotee feels himself to be the lowest of the low. Yeah. But at the same time, he has to preach, and he has to, spread Krishna consciousness. So how can he do that if he doesn't consider himself to be a devotee? Then how will he convince others? Prabhupada explained that the mood of the devotee is that, he's very humble. He doesn't feel himself to be very advanced. But that humility is an impetus, that I'm not a devotee, I'm not very advanced, but you try for it, you have to keep on trying. That acts as an impetus. If you don't feel yourself to be advanced, that's something to strive for. But if you feel that you are advanced, then you stop, or the effort to become purified slackens off. So we have to be careful to remain always very humble. Trinadapi Sunichena, wear that round your neck. But at the same time, realize that what we're giving to others is not coming from us. We're just like the postman. Prabhupada gives the example, the guru is like the postman. It's not that the knowledge that he's giving is coming from him. He's just bringing it from his acharya and passing it on to the next ones. So that way we can remain humble. Yeah, but if we think, if you take pride in being humble, it's a conflict of interest.
There must be a natural quality that is part of the living entity in its pure state.
Say that again, sorry, my ears are not...
There must be when one is in his natural state, that he must be humble, that is a part of the living entity, isn't it? He is humble.
And? Yeah, I agree. It's a natural, integral...
There's one thing I couldn't understand from Prabhupada. He told Dinanath Prabhu, he said, Dinanath, your kirtan is very good. And Dinanath Prabhu said, thank you, Srila Prabhupada. He said, but sometimes I feel proud when I'm doing kirtan. He was good as well. And Prabhupada said, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? You're chanting Hare Krishna, what's wrong with being proud? I can't really understand why. Maybe you could.
Well, who are you talking about? Dinanath?
Dinanath Prabhu.
Yes, he used to be here in the early days. Yeah, African American.
Yeah, he was really good kirtan.
Well, I don't know, I can only guess that Prabhupada knew how to maintain the enthusiasm of his disciples. So if somebody was, doing something very nicely like cooking, or I was just watching a video interview with Kurma Prabhu from Australia, the cook, and he relates how he was, because he was the pujari, whenever there were programs, when Prabhupada came, he wasn't able to go to them because he had to look after the deities all the time. So there was one program, and Kumar had to stay behind. He cooked the offering, he offered it on the altar, and then he was doing the arati. And he didn't have a tape recorder or anything, he was just singing the arati and offering the... So apparently Prabhupada came in to the temple room and was standing behind Kurma. Kurma couldn't see him, but he was just doing his routine, pujari routine, and Prabhupada was really, really pleased with him, and he asked one of the devotees, who is this? And they said, it's Kurma Prabhu, Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, oh, Kurma Dev. Kurma Dev. Yeah, he was praising him. So we may not understand the value so much of what we're doing, but it goes far beyond, I think, our perception. Yeah, what pleases Krishna, even a simple thing. I was with Prabhupada on the balcony in '76 in the Lotus building, and he was watching. It was when we had the first lawn in that what we call Prabhupada Park, So they planted flowers all around, and Prabhupada told Bhavananda, he said, this is your first success, that you planted some flowers. And one lady was there, she was gathering up the flowers in a basket, and Prabhupada was smiling, and he said, just see, with every flower that she picks, she's one step closer to going back to Godhead. So we might not necessarily perceive, the value of what we're doing so much, but Prabhupada definitely did. Krishna definitely did. So, did that answer your question, or confuse things even more?
I was just I've got short memory like you, like you used to.
Well, that comment about, we sign a letter, your humble servant, it's not necessarily a declaration that I am humble, but that at least I would like to be humble. So you're an aspiring servant, it's something that we aim for. We not necessarily have it right now, but at least you declare your intent. And by doing so, you're humble servant. You may not feel very humble, but at least you'd like to be humble. So you make a declaration.
Yeah, because we're supposed to be chanting Hare Krishna, right?
We're supposed to?
We're supposed to be chanting Hare Krishna. That's what it's all about. We're chanting Hare Krishna. So.
Yes.
What's wrong with that? At least you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. It, having a nice kirtan. Anyway, I couldn't really understand that. What's wrong with being proud by chanting Hare Krishna?
Well, even pride can be used in Krishna's service. All right, I'm sorry. I'm not. I haven't clearly answered your question or comment, but anyway, the point is that as devotees, we never think of ourselves, as being advanced. The more advanced you become, the lower you feel yourself to be. Like Krishnadas Kaviraj, when he writes, he's saying, I'm lower than a worm in stool. Of course, he's more exalted than any person on the planet, practically. But he's feeling that way. So those feelings enhance, our attachment to the Lord. Any other questions? Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, thank you for the class. Prabhu is asking, do you know what is the story of this project that Prabhupada started and wanted to start with these farming communities and everything? Is any...
Yes, unfortunately, you're talking about Hyderabad. Unfortunately, the devotees that were in charge there were unable to continue the program as Prabhupada had, initially established. When we first arrived there was Hansadutta. He had a busload of brahmacharis with him, a few grihastas. He was touring around. And then there was Mahamsa, he was the main person. He had gotten the land gifted to ISKCON and collected the money, for the city temple and everything. And there was Tejas. Tejas had been the temple president in Delhi for a number of years. And generally speaking, there was just him and a couple of others. So it was a big struggle. So after a few years in Delhi, he'd had enough, and he had been with the American Peace Corps. They had what they called the Peace Corps, which was, as I understood it anyway, if somebody didn't want to join the Army or the Air Force, the War Corps, then they would join the Peace Corps, and they'd be sent out to different places, goodwill mission. And Tejas had been sent to South India. This was before he became a devotee. And he had either learned or he already knew some methods for enhancing the farming. So he was familiar, he learned the language, Telugu. He was teaching from village to village how to get the maximum yield from their crops. So he knew about farming. And then he became a devotee. So he came down to Hyderabad also. So Prabhupada saw that Mahamsa was a bit out of his depth. He was a person, Prabhupada said, he never complains about anybody and nobody ever complains about him. So he was a nice devotee. But unfortunately, he was not a good manager. So when they got this land, Prabhupada explained what he wanted. He just every evening, he said, first of all, put up a small pandal, which they did, which was not bigger than about a quarter of the size of this room. It's a little stage with a shamiana on top. So Prabhupada said that in the evenings, 7 o'clock, you should have a kirtan, invite all the local villagers to come. After the kirtan, you distribute opulent prasadam, and then you may say something. They're villagers after all, so just maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you say something about Krishna, and that's it. Gradually they'll get purified by chanting and by taking the prasadam. Their hearts will become purified, and then they'll develop a taste for hearing, the philosophy. Then when they get to that point, then they may want to become devotees themselves. So then, they can be initiated or whatever and invited to live on the land, on our land. So that was the idea. And the first night that we implemented that, about 150 local children came. They were running around playing and skipping as they do, but they were all chanting Hare Krishna. Prabhupada heard that, he was very pleased. So the next night when they did it, Prabhupada was sitting in his room. This program was going on, and Prabhupada called me in, and he asked me, what's happening out there? So I said, I don't know. So he said, well, go and find out. So I walked around, and I saw that this so-called prasadam that they were distributing to the villagers, it was just like big congealed lumps of rice. That was it, nothing else. And, congealed, I guess, like a big just lumps, half cooked, half not cooked. And the villagers were being given a leaf plate of this so-called prasadam, and he took one look at it and threw it on the ground. And I saw even a dog had come, and the dog went up, was sniffing the, so-called prasadam, and he walked off, wouldn't eat it. So Prabhupada, I went back and told Prabhupada, he said, bring me some sample. So I brought it and put it on his desk. It was like a hard lump. And Prabhupada was completely disgusted and very, very angry. I mean, very angry. He called in Hansaduta and Tejas. Mahamsa wasn't there, he was in Hyderabad city. He didn't get back until 11 o'clock at night. And Prabhupada blasted them up and down for a half hour at least, just telling them what they were complete nonsense. And he said, this is materially, he said, spiritually it has no value, and materially it is impossible to eat. This is the so-called prasadam. So he was very, very upset. And I saw also that the person that was cooking, he was a hired cook, but he wasn't a cook, he was a sweeper. The same person that had been sweeping the toilets out in the morning, now he was engaged as the cook in the evening, and that so-called prasadam was being offered to the Gaunitai deity. And this fellow was, cooking, and he had a cigarette in his mouth, and these huge woks, and he was scraping off the top layer of the rice, which was not so bad, putting that aside for him and his family, and then the rest of the glug, it was being offered to Gaunitai. So I told this all to Prabhupada. He was furious, absolutely furious. Anyway, Mahamsa came in about 11 o'clock at night, so by that time Prabhupada had cooled down a bit. So he sent him to take rest. He said, we'll talk about it in the morning. So about 6 o'clock the next morning, and it might have been back to Siddhanta Saraswati's disappearance festival, but Prabhupada called them into his room and he blasted them up and down. He said, you're giving so-called prasadam, it's not fit even for dogs to eat. He said, we sing Radhikara Pakayana Vivijabhyanjana. Srimati Radharani is personally cooking for Krishna, and you're offering the food that not even that's been cooked by a sweeper. So he was extraordinarily upset. In the evening, we had a long talk for at least an hour, and then Prabhupada told him, he said, I am very angry. He said that, I am very angry. It wasn't just something that we observed. He said, actually, just like they have restaurants, a first-class restaurant, people will travel many miles to go there and eat, by reputation. So you should be cooking and offering prasadam such that even though I'm not hungry, I'll eat it. He said, not that, you cook something, I'm very hungry, but it's so horrible that I won't eat it. So that way, they tried. The next night it was not so bad, and it continued for another week or so whilst Prabhupada was there. Then we left and went up to Wardha and Bombay, and then over to Allahabad and like that. So after maybe 2 weeks of inaugurating that program, the whole thing fell apart. They couldn't organize between themselves just to do a bit of simple prasadam distribution, and some chanting. So it was more or less a failure on the leader's part that they couldn't, make a program as simple as that and attract people to come to Krishna consciousness. So that fell apart. Later on, I'm not sure why, I can't remember the details now, 78, 79, after Prabhupada had left the planet, then the Badrukas, who were the family that had gifted the property, they were very unhappy with the way that the devotees were doing things, and so they rescinded the trust that had been originally formed to hold that land. They took back about 500 acres, and they left us with about 40 or 50 acres. That land is still there. There's Krishna Balaram deity is installed there, but they're not doing anything. There's no, I was there about 15, 20 years ago. Nothing was going on. And as far as I know, nothing is still going on. Or nothing is not going on. Something is not going on. So that was a plan Prabhupada had. Because of our inadequacy, we couldn't manifest it. but the idea's there. Yeah, it's simple. Sometimes our devotees, when they talk about Varnashram, they get into all these complex ideas about what it is, and they end up not doing anything because it seems beyond our ability. But this is how Prabhupada began. Yeah, a very simple program. Chant, dance, take prasadam, and go home. He said, that's the way I started this movement. You simply, all right, let them eat, chant and dance, and go home. No philosophy. So then after some time, when they become a little purified, then you can speak some philosophy. And the whole movement was actually developed on that basis. Prabhupada cooking for a few hippies at 26 Second Avenue. Yeah, he was doing the cooking, he was doing the serving, he was doing the cleaning, everything menial, small scale, 15, 20 men. But 10 years later, yeah, that was 66. 10 years later in 76, Prabhupada's riding down Fifth Avenue on the Rath carts, first Rath Yatra in New York, 10 years after he started the movement, and 600 or 700 devotees chanting and dancing all the way down, tens of thousands of people seeing the chariots, seeing Prabhupada, taking prasadam in Washington Square Park. That was like the culmination of Prabhupada's preaching, but just in 10 years. Yeah, it's not a long time. But that was the success Prabhupada had, and that began with him just feeding people. Few hippies, beatniks, yeah, just give them some rice dal and chapatis, and that was it. He captured them. Okay, it's very late. We'll finish there. Thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.